So you've been married for nearly 42 years. I know that love is a verb and not a noun, right? It's you make a conscious decision to love each other on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis. So 42 years is incredible. So I wanted to ask, back in 1982, how did you start discussing financial objectives collaboratively, and then also determine like whose responsibility it was to do which roles?
Boy, it came up and went away and came up again. I remember inflation was awful in the early 80s. So everything was horribly expensive. And, even with both of us working, there was still real tight money.
Give you an idea, I got a 13% pay raise when inflation was 15.
Oh, it didn't feel quite like the raise you wanted.
No, no gain really. Well, I was still working for a small company that made CPUs. So to give you an idea, a memory card, which was only a little over 16K, was 15 centimeters on a side. So you're looking at squares about like that. Okay. And that's what we built. And the owner of the company managed to, with great skill and effort, kill it. And then I moved on to various other things and wound up in technical training.
And then Cheryl, back in 1982, I know that's a long time ago. What did your job look like back then? Were you working?
So I was working as a secretary and various different kind of minor office jobs, nothing with any significance with it. I managed to get an associate arts degree, the first in my family to get any college. And I really struggled to get through that, but I was so proud that I had that associate arts degree and working. And then after we married, and we were married 5 years before our first child came along, and I wasn't going to go and work when I had this little baby. I could not drop a child off at childcare. That was just a decision for me. And I know a lot of women manage it in various degrees of success, but for me, I wasn't going to do that. So I stayed at home for almost her first, 4.5 or 5 years.
You talked about education, like you were one of the first to get. You said any college degree in your family, your
And in
family's
college,
history.
my mother had a GED, which she got after I got my college degree.
Wow.
So she didn't even finish high school.
How do you think about the importance of education now in terms of future generations of your family?
Well, my daughter has a master's, so that's demonstrated that it was important to us. And then education around the financial. In my growing up, there was no visibility. Nobody heard of an emergency fund.
Hmm.
We were living, growing up, we were living paycheck to paycheck, and parents were struggling. Divorces, remarriage, all sorts of stuff was happening. And now at this level, I mean, it was more than a decade ago that we talked to Jennifer about basic things like emergency fund and even looking at saving for retirement when her company offered a 401k to even start with a small amount because the over the time is the most important part of the calculation.
I mean, you're talking about this concept of compounding interest over decades is really powerful, and at least get the match. Like, at what point did you understand those terms?
We had seen it with John's benefit package because he had been the primary income earner, especially when I was home with Jennifer. I, so we knew that we needed to do at least that minimum.
The company would match. So they told us, HR said, we're going to offer 401k instead of a retirement. And everybody went, what?
Yeah.
And then they matched 3% for every 6% you put in. So the target has always been the 6%, and they put in through, and you leave it alone. I understood long enough, early enough that with the stock market, it's don't bother. You put the money in something that'll get you spread across all the stock, which the 401k program did, and forget it. What it says daily is irrelevant because it's a long term, not a short term.
A lot of people have a hard time with that idea of not touching the investments, and I think it might have been a Warren Buffett quote of investing. Investments are like a bar of soap. The more you touch it, the less there is. So, John, at what point did you really, were you able to align your risk tolerance with your risk capacity?
I don't actually remember a time. It seemed this is what you do if you want money to grow. I understood the interest rates and all the rest of that stuff. To give you an idea, what really got me off the stock market, so to speak, was one afternoon, Dow went from 600 to 3,600 in one afternoon. And that's because they changed the formula. So what companies were in the Dow got changed that afternoon. And all of a sudden it's a huge bundle and everybody's, oh, then nobody said, well, how come it took them so long to not? So companies like AT&T got pushed to the back of this new company that was coming out called Microsoft. And, that approach. And I just said, why bother? Why put, just put the money in, it's going to grow. It'll grow, especially if you don't touch it and let it go. And I watched guys go crazy playing with the market to get the big turn on it. And I'm making like 8% a year and they're making like -% a year. And it's like, well, how do you do that? I said, leave it alone.
Were you still into technology at that point?
Yes. I wound up with a PBX company that was a Fujitsu subsidiary. And I went from there to next level with Fujitsu to this new product that was coming out then called cell phones. These were, you'd love the first portable one. It was a Samsonite briefcase,
The
a
brick.
car battery, where 25 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
Was with them and rose up, became a manager and repairs and returns and stuff like that. And then they more or less buried the division, the cell phone division, because they weren't willing to compete with Samsung and the others coming up. And then got training on this new product coming out known as routers and trained guys how to install routers and equipment for the customer premise and all the rest of the good stuff.
You really found your niche when you started doing technical teaching.
Teaching.
Yeah.
It's like I grew up with the desire to help people. I mean,
Oh, that's amazing.
literally, one time in college, I was taking the bus to college, and two elderly ladies were having trouble with the bus schedule. And I just said, excuse me, here. And I taught them how to read the bus schedule.
You're now working as a part-time teacher at a local college. You described that you love helping people. Is that what you enjoy most about teaching now, or is there like other elements of teaching that you really enjoy?
Yeah, I like just trying to break a hole through the cognitive fog that you run into. It's amazing how much American history they've been taught and none of it's right. So you got to go that route. They teach them the basic standard narrative. That's like everybody wanted the revolution, everybody wanted this, everything was happy campers all the way up to, and they got the Constitution. It's been happy campers ever since, and all this good stuff. And it's like, oh man.
Don't tell the college, but he would still go and teach even if they weren't paying him. He loves being in the classroom that much.
Right.
So,
It's an addiction.
glad he gets paid for it. And for his hobby, it's worked out very well for that. But he would do teaching even if it wasn't paid.
Let's say that you both had to work, but every job paid the same amount of money. I think, John, it sounds like you'd select being a teacher. And then Cheryl, what might your job be if every job paid the same amount of money?
So I found my love in my work profession in project management, technical project management with all of those details, all of those moving parts, even large technical teams that all need to be supervised. And I have developed in that in the past, 15, 20, 25 years through a couple of different companies. And this one has been especially lucrative these last years that I'm working, which is one of the reasons why I'm still working, is I like what I'm doing. I genuinely do. And they're making it really easy for me to stay.
I can see that from how your earnings record has changed over the few years.
Isn't it amazing? Who would have thought? Yeah.
Financial documents, we sometimes think of them of these, like, just black and white, boring numbers, how many commas, how many zeros at the end of numbers. But I really believe that financial documents tell a story about us and our families.
Yes.
And I reviewed your social security statement. I'm looking at the history now. So you left, Nortel Networks. You worked there for nearly 17 years. You left mid 2009, which pretty heavy year.
It was a layoff. In fact, Nortel went bankrupt, and they were doing layoffs by calling people into the conference room and laying off hundreds at a time. So
Wow.
it was really bad for the industry, and it took me 10 or 11 months to land another position, even with my credentials.
In April of 2016, you ended up starting a consulting company, and your income dropped about 26% that year.
The W-2 income dropped, but under
Mm-hmm.
the LLC, the 1099 income was much higher.
Oh, with
Um,
expenses that you could deduct, right? I think this is really awesome for viewers or listeners to understand, because some people just stay in one lane forever, right? It's the W-2 for life, or they're a 1099 or a self-employed entrepreneur for life. So in terms of your social security statement, it didn't really catch gross revenue in terms of being self-employed. It caught kind of like your net business income that flowed, that you paid self-employment taxes on. But when you jumped from being self-employed, working for your company, to becoming W-2, what were the positive aspects and what were the negative aspects of making that financial move?
Going into the LLC was particularly stressful, but then having to figure out my own health insurance because John was not working at that point in a place that had health insurance. He went on Medicare at that point. It was too stressful because the high deductible policy on the Obamacare stuff, I knew that was, what do they call it? A catastrophe insurance. But
Mm-hmm.
if I had to pay $10 or $11,000 out of pocket, I was going to be pretty darn sick. So
Mm.
it really didn't cover anything, but it made me sure that I wouldn't lose my house if something awful happened,
Mm-hmm.
a bad auto accident or the C word or something like that, which is why I carried that very expensive policy because of course at my income I got no kind of deductions with that.
I guess in a way, in terms of the Obamacare, also called ACA. There's lots of names for it. The
Yes.
healthcare marketplace. I always say the most important thing about having health insurance is having that max out of pocket. Right, that out of pocket maximum is really what you're paying for. That catastrophic, and I'm sure at that point you probably did have an emergency fund, but you didn't want to have to use it.
Being a contractor, I had no paid time off. So
Right.
if I got sick, it was on my dime.
Now earning over 150,000, where previously, even for more than a decade, you were earning about 80 to 100, and kind of in that kind of financial weight class. Did your spending change at all as you began earning more, or do you just view your higher income as an ability to kind of catch up for retirement?
It's only been the last couple of years that I have really felt the increase in the income. Before that, we were paying off the house. So when we had extra money, it went to the house. Now the house has been paid off for a number of years. I can remember at one point when I was contracting, John came to me and said, I have all this money and I'm not sure what we're going to do with it. Because I was head down doing the contracting work and I was working long days and he was taking care of everything financial. He would bring me a sandwich at lunch so I got something to eat. It was those kind of busy days.
Right.
Um, and just everything was busy, busy. So it's only now that I've started learning about, the retirement planning and being in the Andy Panko's group on the Facebook group
Hmm.
that I've gotten insights into, these thoughts about what are you going to do when you retire? What are you retiring to?
Hmm.
Um, and reinforcing basic things like the emergency plan. And what is your budget? How much are you actually spending? And starting to collect that kind of information so that I knew what I needed to build. And then we downsized maybe 10 years ago
Hmm.
from a house that I still kind of miss. And then was
Mm.
something that, like early saving in the 401k, I didn't want to do it. I thought that, I wasn't working. We had this little baby. I wanted to have extra spending money. And John insisted. And he really said we have to put at least the matching amount in. And it was his discipline that got us through that, and I was more pouty about it. But it was the same thing with this big, huge house and just the two of us, where the property taxes were over $1,000 a month there, the upkeep on over 5,000 square feet. And he sort of insisted that we downsize. And I know intellectually it was the right decision. But it's still, I kind of miss those perks, the larger kitchen and the larger bedroom, all of that.
Hmm.
But it was the right financial decision.
I would definitely like to revisit the idea of what housing looks like moving forward, because it sounds like you have a lot of land, but you don't have some of those like other features that some of those features of the other house that you really enjoyed. So I'll just make a note that we'll come back to that. We'll put a pin in the real estate. So it sounds like your roles financially have changed. Like it hasn't been Cheryl with the spreadsheets from day one. Where do you sit now in terms of your discussions financially?
In the beginning, I was just the guy that didn't want to spend money. Okay. And we need to save. And a lot of that is child of depression era parents
Mm-hmm.
who, you save money, you cover yourself, all that good stuff. When they invented the 401k, I'm sitting there saying they're going to give me 3%, but you can't pass it up. So
Right.
did that. So we wound up with about 10% a year in 401k investment.
Mm-hmm.
As the income went up, of course, it just left the percentages alone because they went up too, the amounts.
Yeah, when we got married, I had credit card debt, and he didn't. When we first got married, the rent's due tomorrow. Where am I getting my money from? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I was doing finances when we got married.
When you heard the words credit card, and the balance wasn't being paid off every month, John, what was your initial thought about that?
Well, we're going to fix that. All that happened in my head. Uh, First off, we got to get out from under it.
So some people, when they get married, there's this idea of everything becomes one in terms of religiously, in terms of our spirituality, we think of kind of one flesh. You might heard that term before. Did you have the mindset of like my money becomes our money, your debt becomes my debt? Did you take it in like that, or did you still have some separation financially?
The family money, what you brought in, it was pooled.
Mm-hmm.
And initially, we started off with, well, there's always an issue of people saying, well, I don't got any money, yada, yada. So we both got an allowance of $40
A
Mm.
week.
a week. Okay.
See, yeah, we were big spenders back then.
Big
Forty
time.
dollars a week. Yeah.
Yeah, I kept saving money.
If he wasn't spending it on me, that is.
Oh.
That eventually changed when financially we climbed up where we didn't have to sit there and count our pennies.
Hmm.
And that's it. But you live within your means and you let the rest of the world go hang itself. Last couple of years, she's discovered that spreadsheets are available, and the next thing you know, she's taking our finances and spreadsheeting it and doing this and doing that and doing research. And she's talking about this guy named, what's this guy's name?
This one?
Yeah,
You don't remember?
no.
The measure twice guy. Yeah. So one thing that you mentioned, Cheryl, in your initial application to be on, to be a guest and to go through the financial planning process, is you said we're frugal, mostly spending on essentials. So it sounds like that frugality stuck. The Great Depression, those parenting ideals went down and say, hey, like you never know when you're going to need this. You threw the food out, but you kept the container. You kept the container that the food came in, and everybody had a
Yeah,
big
yeah.
drawer of endless containers. So Cheryl, if I gave you $10,000 extra a year, added that to your current income, you weren't allowed to save it or give it away, and you weren't allowed to use it to support your essentials. How would you spend that $10,000? And imagine you were given this $10,000 every year for the rest of your life, inflation adjusted.
This is one of the things that I'm struggling with because as we get to the point where we have enough money to spend beyond essentials, where do I want to spend that at?
Hmm.
And I think about travel, right? So that would probably be where I'd want to lean into. In fact, I'm so busy at work that I'm asking John to do the research, like some of the river cruises or
Hmm.
some of the train things, the mountaineer stuff. Things that I see in Facebook that have got universally good reviews on them as I look through the population to see if he can get us some sort of plan on when we're going to do something like that.
Hmm.
Because if I'm not planning it, it doesn't necessarily get done the same way. So I'm trying to offload more of that to get him to do some of that legwork for us.
If you were to go on a trip together, just the two of you, what's the minimum amount of time you're willing to take a trip?
Right now, I'm working the schedule. What we did last time was I worked half days and we drove half days. We got to the hotel before the sun went down because neither one of us wants to drive at night in places we don't know. And then I would work some more in the evening. So right now, my work is kind of all consuming. The Banff train over to Toronto, I've already talked to John about that, but maybe after I stop working because I don't want to be, this backpack with my work computer in it. Let me just check a few emails, right? I just got to answer these questions.
Let's add some fun to the experiment. Neither of you have any work commitments for the rest of your life.
Oh,
And now you have $10,000, Cheryl, to start adding to your travel per year. What's the least amount of time that you'd like to be on that trip?
a couple of weeks, maybe.
And what would be like the longest that trip could be, where you're like, we got to get back home at some point?
So I thought about buying an RV and just waiting to the daughter with the cats and her taking the dog, and then we'll be back in a few months uh, and just do the national parks, just because I haven't seen so many of them. And then you get learning about RV ownership, and it's not quite as easy as you think. And somebody else had a podcast where they talked about the awful experience they had with an RV. You listen to a couple of those, and you begin to think, do you really want to deal with everything that's in an RV?
Well, don't watch the movie RV if you want
Yeah.
to. So, John, in terms of travel, how long is too long of a trip for you before you want to get back and settle into your house?
I could pack it up today and be gone for a couple of weeks.
And he could do it in one small case, right? One small suitcase or
Right.
duffel bag of, I need 10.
We're invading a small third world country with her luggage
Yep.
and around the corner with mine.
Yep. And bring me the refrigerator too, because I want my beverages cold.
As the guy said, roughing it is when there's no microwave in the hotel room.
Yes, yes.
So, John, have you ever experienced that need to rough it that way historically?
Historically, yeah. For a little while, I didn't do it often, but what I would do is go camping. And basically, all I took was a tent, sleeping bag, and we're finished.
One pot, one metal mug, and one spoon, and a knife. And that's all he needed.
It's the only way to travel.
John will be out there with his spoon making beans over a handmade fire, while Cheryl, maybe you're in the hotel getting the massage and the room service. How do you find the happy medium, like the Goldilocks window of like just right for travel?
We really do struggle with that because I don't want to spend the money for the spa experience and the $500 a night hotel. I would love the experience, but I don't have to pay for it because it's just too much money going out all at once.
If you receive permission from some financial fairy out there, maybe it's Cody at some point, right? If you got permission to spend an extra 10,000, like would you allow yourself to have some of those experiences that maybe in the past you thought are like, well, I'd like that, but we can't afford that? Like, do you think you'd let yourself experience some of those things?
At this point, I'd like to think so. I know we did the trip where we took a couple of weeks and went up to Idaho, and that, and went through Colorado and visited some friends there. I really liked so much of that. Uh, but the work schedule on top of that, driving half day, working half day kind of thing. I would like to think that we would get to a point where we could allow ourselves to do that. It's just hard to actually get the schedule nailed down. I mean,
Right.
I have paid time off. My company is really a good company. I had hip replacement surgery February 15th. They paid me for 6 weeks off. While I was off, I went through the interview process and got this new job within the same company, accepted the offer while I was out on disability, and came back to the new role. So there are lots of things happening there. But we have open time off. If you can get it approved, you can take it. I'm still learning this new job. I'm now managing project managers.
Right. So, John, you're about nine and a half years older than Cheryl. How does your age difference affect the way you think about retirement planning and also, those adventures that you want to have together and those memories you still want to create? I'll start with you, John.
Well, just that. Uh, Travel until I can't.
Hmm.
It's like for me with teaching, teach until they wheel me out in a gurney. And even then I'll be yelling, no, 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 we got to finish the next one. But she's half the fun, so why wouldn't I want to, would not want to travel by myself unless I am doing it for a very special reason. And I can't lay a finger on what the special reason would be right now, truthfully.
So while Cheryl's working and loving her work and having an amazing opportunity to earn income, do you feel like you're missing out at all on the travel, or are you okay to
No,
wait as long as it takes?
as long as it takes, even if it never happens.
That's great.
It's, the point is, again, she's a major half of the problem or proposition or problem because I can't take your scenario and say, exclude her, and then what would you do? Because it doesn't fit. So that's where's the problem with your scenario.
It's just beautiful that you enjoy each other's company that much to say, I don't really feel like I'm missing out because without Cheryl, it would be missing out because life is to be done together with my bride. And at least that's the interpretation I get from you, John.
You got it.
How do you interpret John's answer? Is that something that you've talked through before?
His preference would be very simple. He could live in a one-room cabin with the one pot, the one spoon, and the one knife, and it would not be a problem for him. The only reason why we have all this stuff around us is because I said, no, not only do I want the kitchen with the sink and the running water, but I want the water filtered before it gets to my coffee cup. He would be very happy with the minimalistic, and I'm the one that keeps saying, oh, look at that nice thing over there.
Hmm.
Shiny.
Right, that's how we ended up in an over 5,000 square foot house. Wasn't him.
The Diderot effect is that idea of you buy the house and then you're like, oh, well, we need new furniture for the new house. And then when you get new furniture, you're like, oh, we need a new TV. New TV, we need and we need a satellite dish. When we get a satellite dish, I realized when we put up our satellite, the roof doesn't look great. Let's get a new roof. And I know that you got into solar recently as
Yep,
well. Like
yep.
that's been a project. So Cheryl, do you kind of align with that idea? Like it feels like there's always something else that needs to be added.
I'm running out of things though, right? And we agree on the being frugal. Like our car is now, is it 10 years old?
Yeah, and paid for.
Yeah, and paid for. So, and until they gives us some reason that we have to replace the car, it's highly unlikely I'm going to go buy a new car.
So it sounds like when you do spend, you're pretty intentional about spending being aligned with what you value personally. You're not buying because, somebody else thinks you should buy it. It's you really think through like how does this fit within our what we value and, the things that our family wants to do.
And I know I'm not immune to that influence. What's going on with the Joneses? I want to make sure that I'm not just buying stuff because the guy next door got it or down the street or whatever. In addition to the travel, when you were talking about what to do with $10,000, there's probably some yard projects that I would come up with to help beautify and learning about native plants and the importance of supporting the ecology and all of that as well.
Well, you said in your application and last time we talked that you love having your garden. You harvest green tomatoes, eggplant, peppers, etc. Some people garden because they enjoy it. It's like a hobby and they love the natural beauty of it. They
Mhm.
love they love to see the seasons come and go and different vegetables during different times. And then on the other side, some people love this idea of kind of living off grid in a way, kind of being self-sufficient, doing gardening to save money. To kind of be even more frugal in the process. So, do you view gardening as more of a hobby that you enjoy, or more of like an action of frugality?
Well, I think there's elements of that. There's something to me very spiritual about growing food.
Mm.
There's a healing that happens for me working in the garden, brings me closer to God, and a sense of how the world is supposed to be. It also gives that calm over the storm, right? And then you see how nature actually is. It's not always kind. When you watch the wasp get the other little critter or the bird that gets the whatever, right? You know that's how life plays out. Right now, with this demanding job, I'm about to put, you know, weed block over the top of the garden and call it done because I
Oh,
can't get to it enough.
yeah.
But I just had hip replacement surgery and I'm doing so much better with all of that healing that it's easier to get out and do things. So maybe this season the garden will have to wait, but maybe next season I'll be up to it again.
I'm really glad that you're feeling better, and I'm also. I will. I hope John is on my side on this. Like, please do not put weed killer on your project. We want you to.
No.
We want you to continue getting closer to God in your journey, your spiritual journey. Please don't kill. Please don't kill it. Even when you feel stressed at work. What's your way of getting closer to God, as Cheryl said?
I'm the guy that sits in weeds in the background.
I think you found a theme, right? So I desired to have something done, something taken care of, something moved along. And then I scheme with John on how to get him to buy into helping me do that. Um, and sometimes that's we got to go do the maintenance in the garden and bury the compost and get it ready for the next season and make the rows and the blackberries need to be there. The canes are getting all over the place. You got to train them back to the fence so that we can not die in the blackberry canes, whatever it is. And then I convince him how it will be a good thing for him to go and do that, and get his help with that. Would you agree?
Get out of the book.
Yeah.
Is it more that you need his help, or you'd like his presence?
I like his presence. And the two of us working together makes it so much easier for whatever it is that we're doing.
Hmm.
Um, even if we're setting stuff up in the house or, going through that, like when we built the library that's in there, got all those bookcases in there. He's got a wall of books, well, a couple of rooms now, actually.
If you weren't allowed to teach others what you're reading, do you still enjoy reading just for yourself?
Just for myself, yeah, but become more and more eclectic.
Mm.
One of my other books that I've read probably half a dozen times already this year was The Last Starfighter.
So with the Starfighter, and earlier you talked about Star Trek, is that something that Cheryl? Do you have any interest in that, or are you just glad he has a hobby? Oh,
Oh, we both like science fiction.
that's great.
Yeah.
She's a hardcore Trekkie.
Had you ever gone to any of the kind of the well-known conventions?
Oh no, no, no,
We're
no.
such strong introverts. You talk about all those people in the same place at the same time, and we're going the other way.
Well, not only that, but they're Trekkies.
So one good thing about your spending is that you're no longer putting any money toward debt. What year did you eliminate your last morsel of debt?
3 years ago,
Was it only 3 years ago?
or more, four.
No, it was longer than that because I was contracting. I was 2 years or so into contracting.
Was that the first time you'd been out of debt since you got married?
Well, the manageable, right? Because credit cards
Right.
come in and we pay them off. But we carried, like, we financed a car. I would have paid cash for the last car. And John's just like, I'm not going to part with that much money. So we came to some negotiation about maybe a third down, so the payment would be less, and interest rates were still low, so that wasn't part of the conversation. With my income, I send money to my mother, who's in her 80s and widowed at this point. So she has limited income, and it just makes her life that much easier. She could live within her budget, but having some money from me, every time I get a bonus check, I send her like $500.
Oh,
Gives her that extra flexibility, right? And it just makes her life that much easier. We're in Texas and she's in California.
hmm.
And that was one of the consequences of moving across the company when John's company, Fujitsu, offered the relocation. And we got out of the high cost of Southern California. But I don't know that we would ever go back at this point, having the cost of living here in Texas and roots here now. But then my mother in her 80s is not here.
How much time do you get to spend with her at this point?
I It's been very little, and I
Okay.
need to change that because tomorrow is promised to no one, and she's already in her middle 80s. She's doing great for her age, But I can see that she's in her middle 80s. So I need to figure out how to spend some time there. I looked at doing like a small rental, right? Renting a room because a hotel would get so expensive over time.
Hmm.
And if John came, we don't all want to try to live in her house for, 2 weeks or something.
Just to preface, like I'm not saying that you should stop working or anything like that, for this purpose or any other purpose. But let's say that we took 3 months of a quarter of a year. How much time might you be in California with her?
Once we figure out the dog part, because it would break his heart to have to go into, doggy storage, to have to go into a kennel of some sort, where he only got out an hour or two a day. It would just be really hard on him. And we don't want to do that. Yeah. It's another reason why we looked at an RV, because we could take our dog with us in our RV and it wouldn't be a problem.
But it's an RV, otherwise known as a hole in the road that you pour money.
How much do you consider this RV idea to go to California every once in a while?
The RV idea was up on the list for a while, but as I did more research and because I would want the one that was $250,000. And as I did more research on that and got an understanding of what the actual cost would be, and I'm not going to climb up on the ceiling, on the roof to service the solar panels or climb underneath of the RV to service the generator. And all of those things need regular attention. It then went to like a two, and John was like, "Thank God, dodge that bullet."
In terms of thinking about wellness, you have your physical, mental, spiritual, relational, and financial health. Those areas of wellness. And I know that a lot of terms in terms of financial planning, a lot of times we focus on the numbers. You might be a little surprised we haven't talked about dollar amounts at all yet. Like we'll get that part covered. Like we'll get the spreadsheets out. In what ways do you invest, whether financially or otherwise, in your physical and mental health? And I'll start with you, John.
No.
No.
No, there's not a lot for me.
Mm-hmm.
Do doctor's appointments.
Yes, we're very good about getting twice a year
We get our twice a year.
physicals. Yeah,
Optometrics, whatever.
yeah.
That is not a cost to consider not having.
The fact that you're teaching, that you're working, he
Well, yeah.
takes the stairs instead of the elevator or, uh, yeah. So when, some of these high school campuses that he does the dual credit on are as big as the colleges.
Thankfully, those little things like just movement, right? Movement is so
Yeah.
important, right?
There's no program, but
Right. And
things do
teaching
happen.
cognitively, your cognitive health stays, by reading and teaching. Like that's a
Yes.
really great way to keep those in place as well.
He made his lunch today. It was a salad. It had cucumbers and bell peppers and all sorts, and a little bit of chicken. But for the most part, it was vegetables. So he doesn't realize how much he focuses on that. But it is something that we're both aware of.
So Cheryl, you talked about spiritual health. You talked about the garden. And what other ways do you kind of invest in yourself physically, mentally, spiritually?
Well, the hip replacement surgery. I really wasn't sure I wanted to do that, but as my mobility declined, and I, consulted with a couple of different doctors and the physical therapist, and now I'm 9 months, 9 weeks post-op, 10 weeks post-op,
Yeah.
and my mobility is almost 100% better than it was. And I rarely think about the surgery now, though there's some deep healing that still has to happen. And the physical therapy has really been helpful with building back strength. So the attention to the physical aspect as well. All of that is important in trying to make informed decisions.
I love that you're both thinking about physical and mental health because, as you know, right? I mean, you can have all the money in the world, but if you don't have your physical, mental health, your spiritual practice, and your relationships, like that money, like kind of loses its value, right? It kind of loses its purpose and utility as a tool. If I took all like 15 or so of your savings and investment accounts and I squished them all together, right, to create this total portfolio, it would equal about $1.1 million. When you hear that number, $1.1 million, what is the initial thought that comes to your mind? And I'll start with you, John.
Just damn. Never anticipated that kind of money. Just it wasn't there.
None of our parents had it.
Well, my dad was Air Force, enlisted. My mom was housefrau. So the no big bucks coming in anywhere. So never dreamed that there would be a large bucket of money at any one given point.
Earlier you talked about how, being frugal and saving as early as you learned about it, you understood that compound interest. Even with that said, you still didn't really expect to actually get to the end of that bell curve.
Knowing it's happening is one thing. The reality of it is something completely different. And that's where I'm really at with this bucket of money. It's like, well, where the heck did that come from? All those years of sticking it aside.
It means freedom. It
Mm.
means I can make choices that I wouldn't have made before that no one in my family has ever been able to contemplate. That we have an opportunity to do something with that for ourselves, for the world, for our family, and how we're going to play that out. And it's because of the level that we've been working at, these last few years, even with John continuing with his college income, that it's not a huge amount, but if it was just Social Security, it'd be so much less. So having his college income on top of that adds a cushion that allows us to go even further. So our income, our family income this year will be the highest we've ever seen at any point in our life, I think. Part of why I'm so excited with working for you or working with you, is what do I do with all of that pile of money? How do I best manage it not only for my generation, but for the generations that come behind us, and for helping like with my mother's situation. To leave a legacy, I mean, if we don't start spending some money, we're going to leave so much from where we're at right now that Jennifer wouldn't have to work at all.
Imagine if she were to inherit, both of your homes, your primary residence and also the one she's living in, the rental. She also inherits 1.1 million from your investments. How would you like her to perceive that inheritance?
When you say perceive that inheritance, I would like her to feel without doubt that she's loved,
Mm.
that this money is available to take care of her for the rest of her natural life, and that she has a responsibility to plan on how to use that well. And to know that it wouldn't, the financial freedom that I have now, if my company called me and said, gee, I'm so sorry, your job's been dissolved, it would be, oh, really? What's my severance package? Right? If I wanted to work more, I would network and I would be back to work next week. That's what happened when I lost my last job. I'm not worried about where my income's coming from or if it stops, which is so freeing. There was a time when, oh my God, I'm being laid off. What am I going to do?
Mm.
No, it's not.
Wow. It's not really about retirement, but financial independence. It's the ability to work because you want to, not because you have to.
Yes, and knowing that I'm topping off my future, his taking care of his future as well, and our daughter's future, and potentially caring for my mother, or at least supplement it. We send her Amazon care packages throughout the month.
Oh, that's so
So
sweet.
yeah, and it just takes the edge off of her having to afford things in the inflationary cycle. So being able to use my money to make life more of a pleasure for people I love.
I think that we will certainly revisit ways to, give during life and upon death, in ways that align with what you value, making sure that the gift has a story to go with it, right?
Yes.
That is perceived the way you intended to be communicated. Let's start with church. So when you give to church, how do you perceive that gift?
That we have been so well blessed and that are lucky to be in the financially sound position that we're in. And the work that the church does, I want to see that continue. They do so many things in so many different ways that touch lives in a positive way. And the education that they provide, the support in the community that they provide, and just the community that they provide. We're better off having them in the world. All of us are better off than if they didn't have any money and had to close the doors. People find themselves in a mess sometimes through no fault of their own, or because they didn't have opportunities, or because they had here's that education component. Education is part of the solution to any problem. It doesn't matter what the problem is. part of the solution is going to be education. And you have to find the right education. Not the guy selling something, fear mongering. I saw a chart the other day, I think it was in LinkedIn, where, the degree that they want to sell something and the amount of fear that they're trying to put into the conversation, and a straight arrow up. It was very clear that if they, trying to peddle something, that being afraid of it helps them do that.
Hmm.
But the education part of it, so that people have a chance to get a leg up.
My definition of kindness is giving to others without expecting something in return. With that said, when you do give without expecting something in return, almost every time you do receive in abundance.
And in unexpected ways. And sometimes it's a very simple thing in the form of education. Sometimes it's companionship, company, the relationship building. You never really know where the blessing's going to come from. So in my childhood, we were recipients of charity. We were not givers of charity because of the poverty that was around us. So it wasn't until we got involved with the church, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then their annual campaign, that I began to get educated on what that meant. And Jennifer was in their Sunday school classes, and we were attending services more regularly, much more regularly then. When Jennifer was young, I told John to go find us a church home because we needed to find something like that, and I was unchurched for the most part, and so was he. And so, and I, Jennifer was young, but still old enough that it was time. So he went on his way to find us a church home. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to explore these things. You don't get this kind of interaction, every day. With the expertise that you bring to the table and the ability to help guide us through this, I'm just delighted to be here.
Oh, I appreciate that. Have you had this experience with a financial advisor before?
No. No, they've been the free ones, like my 401ks at Fidelity. So when you call them, it all depends on the quality that answers the phone. And then they've confused me so many times with their language being slightly different than the question I was trying to ask, that I came away going, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing or not. I have enough money now that I can be sending more that way, but maybe I don't want to do that. The advisor where John's money's at through the college is a little bit better, but still, it's a free kind of, this is my agenda, let me get through that. And his 1+% guy that he was with for decades was useless. Sorry. As far as helping him get where we needed to be for financial stuff.
To give advice in somebody's best interest, right, as a fiduciary, you first have to
Yes.
understand their interests. And I do find that there are, unfortunately, some financial advisors that don't, whether they're not paid to do that or they just don't really see, they're not interested in that element. They miss the why behind the money. And unfortunately, when you don't know the why behind the money, when you give advice about investments or insurance or estate planning, it might not actually be aligned with what's important to the person.
That's huge, the why. And in all fairness, the financial advisors that John was working with, I found them through our church, and I was the one that sent him there for that. But we were so much less mature in every way that maybe it just wasn't a good match.